George Floyd's death has sparked a big conversation about anti-Black racism and the nature of policing. Many advocates are calling for governments to defund the police. In Minneapolis, where this all started, 9 city council members have pledged to, quote, begin the process of ending the city's police department. So why are city council members making this pledge, and what could a police-free future look like in Minneapolis? Phillipe Cunningham is the Minneapolis council member for Ward 4. He joins us from that city. Hi, Council Member Cunningham. Pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Before we get into some of the questions I have on the pledge to sort of end or defund the police in Minneapolis, I do want to ask and check in with you about how your city is doing, your community is doing. It's been a really awful few weeks and challenging few weeks, I know, for so many people there. We've been hearing reports all the time. How is everybody doing? How is your community doing?
Thank you for asking that question and really centering the wellness of our city and the folks who live here. Folks are right now still deep in the movement and the conversation. What we have is folks who are really beginning to rise up and demand serious change. You know, the damage that has been done to our city, whether it be from the riots or from extremists and white supremacists who came into our city to damage, cause destruction and violence, we are beginning the path to rebuilding an equitable economy. We're using this as an opportunity to really get to multiple layers of racial injustices in our city. So we're tired, but we're still fighting.
What is it like to be a political representative in the midst of all that, with the potential power to affect the kind of change that many of your constituents are coming to you asking for?
I'll tell you that when I ran in 2017 to be the council member for my ward, that I had no idea that what was in store for me was fighting off white supremacists in the community during a global pandemic and economic meltdown. I could not have seen that coming. And with that being said, I am truly grateful to be here in this role and having the support of my community. You know, I have done a lot of work in my lifetime to be prepared for a moment like this. I never would have imagined that it would have come to me at 32 years old, but I'm grateful to be here and to have the support of my community to step into an opportunity that many of us didn't think would come for decades.
So let's talk a bit about what yourself and other members of council are moving forward with. You're one of 9, and please do correct me if I'm wrong, city council members who have pledged to begin the process of ending the Minneapolis Police Department. Can you just explain for our viewers, is that as simple as it sounds, or what does that encompass?
Nothing is ever as simple as it sounds in news bites and sound bites. So, I'll just say that, the conversation had to start somewhere. And we started it by declaring our vision of wanting to actively move towards a city without police. Does that mean that will suddenly happen tomorrow? We won't have police tomorrow? No. Does that mean that we are dismantling safety? Absolutely not. The work ahead of us, we actually also committed to a year of community engagement. So we are going to be doing some deep engagement that really centers Black and Brown communities in our cities who are not only disproportionately impacted by police violence, but community violence as well, to co-create these new systems of public safety and the best pathway to get there. That's the work that's still ahead of us. So folks who are asking, what is the plan? Or, what's this going to look like? We have a framework. We have the public health approach to public safety as a framework of how we can move forward. But we can't answer those questions, nor should we, because what we know is that the top-down approach to government has led to the outcomes that we have today. We need to flip it up and work from the ground up to government and really fall back and center those who are disproportionately impacted.
So if I understand it correctly, basically you've laid out a timeline to take a closer look at how this would work. And then in a year, is that right? In a year, you would present a more specific plan, let's say.
I really can't say whether or not it's a year.
Okay.
We don't have that kind of timeline set up, but the one thing that we have committed is to a year of community engagement.
So from your perspective, based on your experience in the community, I was actually just interviewing, the question has arisen here in Canada as well. I was just interviewing the leader of an opposition party in the province I'm in. And he was saying that his position on defunding the police would be not to take resources away from them, but to add to community supports. Is that a viewpoint that you considered, or do you think the resources really, truly do need to be taken away from the police? And if so, why?
Yes, I think that we need to be rethinking public safety entirely. And when we have a police department that takes up such a huge component, a proportion of our city budget, we need to think about what are our priorities. Thinking about, as Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, our budget as a moral document. What are we truly investing in? Are we going to continue to overly invest in a system that we know is not working, over policing, criminalization of Black and brown folks, mass incarceration? We know that that is not keeping our community safer. But what we do know is that the public health approach to public safety, it does work. It thinks about violence as a disease that spreads. It spreads interpersonally, it spreads intergenerationally. And what the public health approach does is that it gets to the root causes of the issues. Now, that could be far upstream, thinking about housing and education, but that also can be a direct domestic violence intervention, a family violence intervention, like as those moments are happening. Also gang violence interventions, like that stop retaliatory violence, that treat trauma as it's happening. So when we talk about violence prevention, it's also intervention as well. And we need to be investing in those because the evidence is resoundingly coming back that it works.
So I've read some quotes, and you'll be more familiar with this than I am, from the mayor of Minneapolis, who says he doesn't believe in abolishing the police department. And the police department does sort of answer to him. But my understanding is that there's no veto power or anything. So if council ultimately did determine to move ahead, they could. Is that accurate?
It's going to be a very complicated process. Yes, there is a veto-proof majority. So if we were to pass a piece of legislation and it was to be vetoed, then we do have the ability to override that veto. However, right now in our city charter, which is essentially our city's constitution, the police department is a charter department, which means it's required to exist as is. And so if we are going to be changing the city charter to change that to, let's say, move to a Department of Public Safety rather than a police department and expand what we're funding within that realm, then we are going to have to either have a unanimous vote with all the city council members, which is not likely to happen, or it goes to a vote to the people for a referendum, and that would likely take place next year.
Okay, well, something for us to watch, certainly. Thank you so much for sharing your time and perspective with us this evening, Councilmember Cunningham. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.